We're now on Daf Mem Tesam at base Toshma, and we're going to try to bring a proof now to be poshet the suffix from the following brisa. Li'achar, after the Kohen Gadol enters into the Kodesh Kadoshim, he's holding on to the machta with the gecholim in his right hand. He's holding on the kaf with the ketores moli chafnov in his left hand. Ketzadu osef. How does he achieve the second chafina? And this brisa is going to be a final proof that there is a second chafina inside the Kodesh Kadoshim. Now, this is going to be a very, very challenging task because the kaf that he brings into the Kodesh Kadoshim has exactly the midah of Maloch Chafna. And now he's going to have to do a second chafina, taking the ketores that's inside the kaf and pouring it into his hands. But wait a second. How is he going to possibly achieve that goal of a second chafina when he's holding on to the kaf? You know, he's holding on to the kaf and pouring the kaf, the contents of the kaf, the Torah, into the chafna. I mean, you need a third hand for that. So the brisa says that, again, now let's just emphasize, the reason why he has to pour the contents from the kaf into his maloch chafnav in the second chafina inside the Kodesh Kadoshim is because if he would do the chafina directly into the kaf, let's say he put the kaf on a table or on the floor and he did the chafina, then inevitably he would miss some of the ketores in the act of chafina, and it's got to be exact. So the only way of solving that problem is by pouring the contents of the kaf into his maloch chafna, but there's no one else in the Kodesh Kadoshim to help him do that. So how does he do that by himself? Again, the first thing he has to do is take the machta with the gecholim and put it on the ground. Fine. Now he's got the kaf in his left hand. How does he achieve the goal now? He's freed up his right hand of pouring from the kaf into maloch chafnav into his two hands. Oches es habazach, right? Bazach is another word for the kaf. Beroshe etz bosach, right? He holds on to the kaf with his fingers. Roshe etz bosach. So it means that the handle of the kaf is towards his body, right? And he's holding, he again, some Mefarshim say that the handle of his kaf is being held perhaps under his elbows or so. Yesh Omer b'shinov. Others say he's holding on to the handle of the kaf with his teeth. He's got to practice that for a week before Yom Kippur. Umale begudlo. So now, right, he's holding on to the handle of the kaf in his teeth, and now he's going to place his two thumbs onto the handle. So now he's got the handle steady, held between his two thumbs. And now what he's going to do is Achamagas lebein atzile yodov. Okay, so now he's holding it's very important that we realize that the handle is towards his chest so that he can grab onto the handle. And now he's going to hold on to the handle with his two thumbs, and the kaf is now suspended in midair, so to speak, above his two hands. And then v'chozer umachzira l'toch chafnav. Now he tips over the calf, pouring it into his two hands. Now the Brisa goes into a side point. He's now going to do the actual hakpara, which means he's going to take the maloch chaftav and pour it into the machta, which has the gecholim. So it says sovra. He should sort of, according to his first opinion at least, he should pour it onto the gecholim in a way kidei shelo yeyashana shoel lava. In other words, it would be very dangerous if immediately the pillar of smoke came into his face. I mean, he could die from it. So what should he do? He should pour the Ketores in like one spot on the fire, on the Gecholim, and it'll take a while for the Gecholim to consume that Ketores, because there's a heavy volume of Ketores that's coming straight down onto the fire. So in the meantime, he could straighten out his body and he won't get burnt. Yeshomer, according to a second opinion, on the contrary, mefazra, he should take the Ketores and sort of gently, slowly spread it around the Gecholim, Kadesh Yashonim and Maheres Lavo, and then the fire is going to immediately burn so that he'll get out of there as soon as possible. And there are two reasons, unfortunately, saying why we want to get him out of there as soon as possible. One is because we don't want him to enjoy the beauty of the Kodesh Kadoshim, that's Me'ilah. And secondly, they're eagerly waiting for him to come out alive from the Kodesh Kadoshim. As you remember, during Bayit Sheni, where the Kohen Gedolim were quite often stukim, they would die inside the Kodesh Kadoshim. He avoda kasher shebemigdash. This is the most difficult avoda in the Beis HaMikdash, to hold on to the kaf with the tips of his fingers and then clasp onto the kaf in a way that he could pour the kaf into his two hands. Very, very difficult. So Gemara says, Zohi v'sulo. You use the word Zohi, implying that this one and no other one. Va'ika malika. Malika is also very, very complicated because he's got to, in one hand, he's got to hold on to the feet of the bird. This is a chatas ha'of, what we call. And at the same time, he's got to do a malika with his thumb. And ve'ika kmitza. Kmitza, in the case of a mincha, is very, very complicated, very challenging. And we learned all about this back on Daf Mem Zayin Amud Beis. Ella, but rather Zohi avoda kosher me avodos koshos shebem English. Amongst that group of three avodos, which are very difficult, this is listed as one of the three, meaning the chafida inside the Kodesh Kodashim is one of the three most complicated, challenging avodos. Shma Mina, we see clearly from this brisa, chofein v'chozer v'chofein Shma Mina, that you need a second chafina in the Kodesh Kodesh. Now, previously we had discussed the issue of parchatos. What happens if the first Kohen Gadol shechted the parchatos? Can the second Kohen Gadol simply take that dam and go on from there? Iboilahu shachad umeis maushi kones acher bidomo shel rishon. We'll add, right? In other words, the first Kohen Gadol shechted the par of Yom Kippurim. He died after he was makabel the dam before the zrika. Can now the second Kohen Gadol that replaces the first one take the dam from the shchita of the par of the first Kohen Gadol? He doesn't have to do another shchita. It's enough that he does a dam. Should we interpret the pasuk Let's read the pasuk once more. It says, "Bezos yavo Aaron al hakodesh bepar." How do we understand the word bepar? Afilu b'domo shel par, o dilma bepar v'lo b'domo shel par. What is considered par when the Torah says yavo Aaron el hakodesh bepar? Is it even the dam shel par? So the first shechita of the kohen gadol of the par, there's still dam, so it's considered par, and therefore the second kohen gadol is going to be able to continue. And bezos yavo el hakodesh bepar. Or do we say no? Bepar means below b'domo shel par, and therefore the shechita, the first kohen gadol, is not going to help for the second kohen gadol, because the dam of the par is not considered the par, so that the second kohen gadol will have to do the shechita. Rab Chanina Omer, his opinion, as we saw earlier, is bepar v'lo b'domo shel par. So the shechita, the kohen gadol of the first kohen gadol, is not going to be sufficient. Reish Lakish Omar bepar afilu b'domo shel par, and Reish Lakish accepts the definition of dam as par against Rabbi Chanina, and the same machlokes, identical, is machlokes shim Rabbi Ami Omar bepar v'lo b'domo shel par, Rabbi Yitzchak Nafka Omar bepar v'afilu b'domo shel par. So that Rabbi Ami holds like Rabbi Chanina, and we interpret that only the par itself is the par. You need a shechita of the par, and we have Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yitzchak Nafka who agree that no, that par means even domosh par, even the dam of the par is called a par. Esvei Rabbi Ami, le Rabbi Yitzchak Nafka. I'm going to prove to you from a Mishnah in Masechet Pesachim, Daf Pei Tes, regarding the Korban Pesach, that in fact par means the par itself, not the way Rabbi Yitzchak Nafka you understood it. That means even b'domo shel par. Now, in order to appreciate this Mishnah in Pesachim, we'll just give the background. We learned this when we did the Daf in Pesachim, that if you want to eat from a Korban Pesach, you first have to be manui. And the question is, are you allowed at some point to jump ship, so to speak, meaning to undermine your minui and link up with a different chabura? Also, the question is, up until what point can you join the chabura? Can you sign up and register for the chabura? Nimnin umoshchim yedei mimenu ad sheishachet. Everything depends upon the shechita. So the Korban Pesach comes from a seh, either a young goat or a young sheep or lamb. And once the shechita was done, then number one, it's impossible to join the minui. And number two, it's impossible to remove yourself from the minui, to sort of unregister yourself, to cancel your registration. The Torah says with regard to Korban Pesach, im yimat habayis miyos misev lakachu shcheino hakarov el beiso b'michsas nefashos ish lefi achlo tachosu al haseh. And the word tachosu is a reference to the registration at the up until the time of shechita you can register, and up until the time of shechita you can unregister yourself. V'im Isa, here's what Rav Ami wants to learn from the Mishnah Pesachim. If you, Rabbi Yitzchak Nafka, are correct, and even the dam of the par is called a dam in the case of a chatos, and therefore by analogy, even the dam of the seh of the Korban Pesach is called a seh, is then the Mishnah should have said, Ad sheyizorek mi boile, it should have said, that the critical moment or either joining or unjoining the Korban Pesach, the minui, should be the Zrikas Adam, because up until Zrikas Adam, it's still called a seh. When it's a Shani Hossam, the case of Korban Pesach is different. It's a special, unique halach in Korban Pesach. In Einochinami, Rabbi Yitzchak Nafka says, in general, dam is considered like the par, and it would have been considered like the seh for Korban Pesach, except for the fact that the Torah says, "V'im yimat habayis miyos miseh." What does that mean, miyos miseh? And im yimat habayis means that if the minuyim on the Pesach come to let's say, diminish or decrease the number of menuyim. They want to be Moshe Chesyudneim. It's mios miseh. What is mios miseh? Michiyuse diseh. As long as the seh is alive, but not after shechita. Once the shechita was already implemented, and it's no longer miyusa diseh, then there's no such thing as imyimat habayis. You cannot remove your minui. You can only do that as long as the seh is alive. But that's a unique halacha with regard to Korban Pesach. It has no implication as far as the par of Yom Kippur, because there it just says bipar, and even the dam is considered the dam apar. But in seh, in Korban Pesach, where it says michiyusa de seh, it's only called a seh as long as it is alive. Masiv Marzutra is going to raise a question again against Rav Yitzchak Nafcha from the case of Peter Chamor. And the Torah tells us in Shmos Perek Yud Gimel, called Peter Chamor Tifte B'Seh, that when you have a vlad, the first vlad that's born to a female donkey requires pidyon, and you have to be poda it with the vlad of a keves or an eitz, which are two different species. And now the Mishnah in Bechoros, which is being quoted here, Moshe Marzutra, from Bechoros Daf Yud Beis, is disqualifying the following possible animals for pigeon of a Peter Chamor. Ain't podim, we cannot be podim Peter Chamor lo be'egel. Egel is a calf that belongs to the cow. It's not a keves or an eiz. Below b'chaya, like for example a deer, that's not considered seh, so it cannot be used for the pigeon Peter Chamor. Below b'shchuta, and not even after the keves or the eiz was slaughtered, was shechted. In other words, once the shechita took place, it can no longer be called seh. Below bitreifa, let's say, for example, you have a lamb, but its legs were cut, were bruised in a very bad way. Below bikelayin, if let's say you take a tayish, which is a mixture of an eiz and a rachel, below b'koi, which is a mixture, a breeding of, again, two species. Second, it's for a tayish and it's svia. Elabiseh. You need an animal that was born from two types of keves, or two types of eiz. But in any event, it says in the Mishnah you cannot be poda with a shachud if it's already shechted. So it means as soon as you shechted the seh, it's no longer called a seh. And if we apply by analogy that same principle to a par, as soon as you shecht the par, it's no longer par, even though you still have the damin. And that's a kasha against Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha. The Gemara answers in defense of Yitzchak Nafcha, shiny hasam, the din of pigeon Peter Chamor is different, and you need a seh chai that's alive, the yoliv, because we have a gzeira shav of seh semi pesach. In pigeon Peter Chamor it says tifte b'seh, and in Korban Pesach in Shmos Perek Yud Beis in Parshas Bo it says seh tamim, and just like in the case of Pesach, you cannot consider the seh as a seh after shechita, because we derive that from Yosmi seh. So too, by process of analogy through this Gzeir Shavat says semi Pesach, you cannot be poda Petach Hamor after the shechita, because after the shechita it's no longer called a seh, just like in Korban Pesach, after the shechita it's no longer called a seh, and therefore you can't remove yourself from the chabura. The Gemara says, how far are you going with this Gzeir Shavat, equating pigeon Petach Hamor with Pesach? Why don't you go further and say Mala Halon, just like in the case of the Seh of a Korban Pesach, the Torah in Parshas Bo requires Zachar, Tam, Uben Shana. The Torah says in Korban Pesach, Se Tamim Zachar Ben Shana Yelachem. Is Afkan here too in Pidyon Petach Hamor? Are you going to require a Zachar, Tam, Ben Shana? And yet the Mishnah says no. It's Bein Zachar, Bein Nekeva, Bein Gadol, Bein Katan, Bein Tamim, Bein Balmum. So the Gemara answers Talmud Lomar Tifte Tifte, that in the parsha of Pidyon Petach Hamor, it says Tifte twice. It says Kol Petach Hamor Tifte B'Seh V'im Lo Tifte V'Arafta. So what is the extra Tifte? Riba. It's a ribui to teach you that you can be poda even on a seh that's in a keva, even a balas mum, and even a seh that's more than a year old. Gemara Sakasha e tifte riba. If you have this ribui, that you can be poda even though it's in a keva, etc., is afilu kulanami. So why don't we go a step further and say that an egel, a chaya, a shchuta, a treifa, kelayim, a koi could also be used for Pidyon Petach Hamor, just like none of those are suitable for a Korban Pesach. But nevertheless, here in Pidyon of Petach Hamor, it says Tifte. Doing Cain, Semaya Hanilin. But we have Xer Shabbos says Sef from Pesach, so we must learn something from Pesach. Therefore, we're going to have to say that the Ribu of Tifte is going to teach me that you can be poda even something that's not Zocher, Tomim, or Ben Shana. Because in all those cases, it's still called a Seh, but the Xer Shav is telling us that we should exclude for Pidyon Petach Hamor that which is not a Seh, as the case of after Shechita. And here we turn to Daf Nun Amud Aleph, Esvei Rabbi Yitzchak Nafkel Rabbi Ami. Now the opposite. How could you tell me that par cannot be Domo Shel Par? Let's take a look at the parsha of Par Kohen Mashiach, which is a case of a Kohen who gave a ruling, a mistaken ruling, on an Itzer Kares, and he has to bring a par. And once he does the Shechita and the par and the Zrikas Hadam, and the Emurim were already brought on the Mizbech, the Torah says, V'hotzi es kol par. This is what we call a chatos hanisrefes. We take it out of chutz lamachna and we burn it. And we see clearly that it's called a par. And the Torah says, V'hotzi es kol par, even though it's after the Shechita, it's still called a par. So the Gemara answers, par is dafka par chai. In the case of par kohen Moshiach, it says v'hotzi es kol aparel michutz lamachna. It doesn't mean that we're taking out something which is called a par, but rather sheyotzi es kulo. In other words, what's ever left after the entire process of shechita and zrikas adam, that we take the entire thing outside to be burnt, and that's all called a par. So that's derived from the extra word kol. The Gemara now asks another kasha, according to those who say that par is only a par and not domo shel par. In the parsha of Karbonos of Yoma Kippurim Vayikra Tezayin, it says veis par achatos veis sa'ir achatos asher huvas damam lechaper bakodesh yotzi el michutz lamachne v'sarfu v'eish es orosam v'saram v'spirusham. We see that a par is called a par even after Zrikas Hadam, because it says Asher Huva Es Domam, and yet it's called par chatos. Omer Papa Bi'ar Ubasar Uferesh. When the pasuk is speaking about the goof of the par with its ar, its outside hide, and its basar, and all of this together, is then the Kuli Amalo Pligi. Both Reb Chanina and Reb Ami and Reish Lakish and Reb Yitzchak Nafka agree unanimously that it's called a par even after its shechita. because it has everything that it needs. The entire body is there with its or, with its basar, pircho. Ki pligi, what is then the machlokes about par liachar shchita and its status is bidam, when all you have is the dam. You have nothing left but the dam. The Kohen Gadol wants to go on Yom Kippurim into the Kodesh Kodashim, and he has to bring in the dam of the par, which he himself shechted, is mar sover, according to Reish Lakish Rav Yitzchak, is damo dam ikri par. If the second Kohen Gadol, replacing the first one, brings in the dam, that's considered as if he brought in the par. It's if he did the shechita himself. Umar sover, but according to Rav Chanina and Rav Ami, dam lo ikri par. Omer of Ashi mistaber command the Omer dam ikri par. And Rav Ashi says, I have a clear-cut proof that dam is considered par. And that, of course, is going to support the opinion of Reish Lakish and Rav Yitzchak Nafcha. The Torah says, the Chsiv, regarding Parashal Yom Kippur, says, B'zos yavo Aaron el HaKodesh b'par ben bakar. What does it mean? Otu b'karnel ma'ayil blei. The Torah says that he's bringing the par into the Kodesh Kodashim. What is it? He's holding on to the horns of the Gemara is sort of like being facetious. He's holding on to the horns of the bull, and he's taking it into the Kodesh Kodashim. No. Ella, for sure, what the pasuk has in mind is bidamo and korele par, and yet it says in the pasuk, "Bezos yavo Aaron al kodesh b'par ben," because he's only taking the dam into the Kodesh Kodashim. It means that the dam is called a par. The idach. And what will Rav Chanina and Rav Ami say about this pasuk? How they can interpret the pasuk that says "B'zot yavo Aaron al kodesh b'par ben bakar"? And the answer is "B'meh huchshar Aaron lavel hakodesh." The Torah is not talking about the par. The Torah here is talking about the Kohen Gadol. The Kohen Gadol wants to go into the Kodesh Kodashim to do his avoda, and what are the credentials, so to speak? What gives him the license to enter into the Kodesh Kodashim? And the answer is, but par min bakal lechatos. He's going to bring a par in the azara, a live par. He'll do all the avodos, and now he's allowed to enter into the Kodesh Kodashim. But the Torah is not saying that Yavo means he's going into the Kodesh Kodashim with a par. That's impossible. So the Gemara thought, Rav Ashi thought, I'll prove to you that he's going in with the dam, and that's called by the Torah par. Name. What the Torah is saying, B'zos Yavo Aaron, means that if he shechted his par in the Azara, then Yavo Aaron el HaKodesh. Then Aaron is now kosher to go into the Kodesh Kodashim and to implement the avodah. So this is where we're going to end for today. And we are here on the top of Daf Nun Amud Aleph, and we're up to Tepukla. Okay, let me wish you a very, very fine day.
Shkoch.
Thank you so much.